She ran into my legs like she'd been looking for me her whole life. I looked down. A little girl, 7, maybe 8, had both arms wrapped around my knees, face buried in my scrubs, crying so hard her entire body shook with it, like a leaf in a storm, like something that had been holding itself together for too long and had finally, completely, given up. I didn't think. I crouched down immediately, hands on her small shoulders, nurse instincts already firing. Hey, I've got you. I kept my voice low, steady. The voice I'd spent years learning to use in rooms where panic was contagious. I've got you. Look at me. Okay? Can you look at me? She lifted her face, and my chest cracked clean open. She had enormous dark eyes. The kind that looked like they belonged on someone much older. Someone who had already seen too much of the world and hadn't quite forgiven it yet. Tear tracks streaked her cheeks. Her bottom lip trembled violently. Someone had put her in a white dress with small flowers on it, like she'd been dressed for something important, and the contrast between that careful, hopeful little outfit and the absolute devastation on her face was the saddest thing I had seen in 4 years of nursing. "You're a nurse?" she whispered, eyes dropping to the badge on my chest, the scrubs, the stethoscope around my neck. Her voice was wrecked, rough from crying. "You're a nurse, you can help. You can help people. That's what nurses do." "Yes." I held her gaze. "That's exactly what we do." "Then please." Her hands grabbed the front of my scrubs, small fingers twisting into the fabric, and she looked at me with the kind of desperation that only children are capable of. Completely unguarded, completely raw, no armor, no pretense, just pure and terrible need. "Please help my daddy. Everyone keeps saying they're sorry. The doctors keep saying sorry and writing things on their boards and walking in and out and..." Her breath hitched violently. "And nobody is doing anything and he's getting worse and I don't want my daddy to." She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I already understood. I looked up from her face. We were standing in the corridor outside the ICU wing, the restricted section. The section I was very deliberately not assigned to tonight. I could see 2 large men in dark suits standing outside one of the doors further down the hall. They were private security. I'd noticed them when I came on shift and had been quietly warned by the head nurse to stay in my lane that it was a restricted case. Very high profile and that I shouldn't ask questions. I looked back down at the little girl still gripping my scrubs. "What's your name?" I asked her. "Mia." "Mia." I said it gently, the way you say a name when you want someone to know you're actually hearing them, not just processing sound. "I'm Eli. How long have you been out here by yourself?" "Since the last doctor left." Her chin wobbled. "He patted my head and said my daddy was a fighter." Her voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "But he looked scared when he thought I wasn't watching." Of course he did. I stood up slowly, took her hand in mine. It was so small. "Don't," said the rational, career-preserving part of my brain. "This isn't your case. Those men at the door will stop you. You'll get written up. You'll get worse than written up." Then I heard my grandmother's voice, the way I always did in moments like this, warm as wood smoke, unhurried, certain of itself. "Eli, a healer who walks past suffering because it isn't convenient has already lost the most important thing about themselves." I took a breath, and I walked toward that door. The 2 men in suits moved to block me before I was within 10 feet. "ICU 7 is restricted." The larger one didn't even blink. "Turn around. I'm a nurse on this floor." I kept my voice professional, calm. "I'm here to assess the patient. You're not on the approved list. Turn around." I felt Mia's hand tighten around mine. "She brought me," I said simply, and looked down at the little girl beside me. Something shifted in the larger man's expression when he looked at Mia. Just for a second. Just a flicker, quick as a struck match before the stone face returned. He stepped aside. Nothing could have prepared me for the man in that bed. I don't know what I had expected. Someone diminished, maybe. Someone made smaller by illness the way illness makes everyone smaller. The way it strips away everything that makes a person feel like themselves and leaves something pale and quiet behind. This man was not small. Even lying completely unconscious, hooked to more monitors than I had ever seen on a single patient. He was the most overwhelming presence I had ever walked into. Tall, even horizontal, you could tell, the bed almost not enough for him. Dark hair against white pillows. A jaw like carved granite. Broad shoulders that the hospital gown failed to diminish in any way. A face that was hard even in unconsciousness, not cruel but absolute. Like someone who had never once in his life made a decision he wasn't completely certain of. There was a tension in him even now. In the set of his mouth. The slight furrow between his brows. Like somewhere deep in whatever darkness he'd fallen into, he was still fighting. "Who are you?" I thought. I picked up the tablet with his chart and started reading. By the third page, my frown was so deep it hurt. 3 of the best cardiologists in the country had their names on this file. 2 specialists flown in from overseas. Every intervention documented, every drug trialed, every theory explored and abandoned. His heart was failing in a way that made no physiological sense. Not a blockage, not a typical arrhythmia, not anything that had a name in any textbook I'd ever studied. His body was shutting down like something at its core had simply decided to stop. Like he had decided to stop. His oxygen read 79%. Mia hadn't let go of my hand. She stood beside me, silent now, watching her father's face with those old, heartbroken eyes. "He stopped waking up 2 days ago," she said quietly. "Before that he would squeeze my hand sometimes. Now he doesn't squeeze anymore." I set the tablet down. I pulled a chair to his bedside and sat, and I let the textbooks go quiet in my head. Let the clinical language go still. And I reached instead into the oldest part of my education, the part that existed long before medical school, long before clinical rotations and board exams and sterile, fluorescent rooms like this one. My grandmother had been a healer in the way that certain people simply are, not because of credentials but because of something that runs through them like a current. She used to sit with me on her porch and talk about the body not as a machine but as something more like a flame, capable of going out not from damage alone, but from a kind of forgetting, a flame that had simply forgotten it was supposed to burn. Sometimes, she told me, smoothing my hair back from my forehead, a body just needs to be reminded that there is still warmth in the world. That it is still connected. She'd pressed her palm to my chest when I was small and sick with fever, and I had felt something move through me like a current from her hand. You breathe life into the place that has forgotten how to hold it. Like this, mouth to mouth. Not just air, but intention. Not just breath, but presence. You tell their body, "I am here. You are not alone. You do not have to go." She'd called it rooting. She'd said, "It won't work for everyone. But for the ones who are only partially gone, for the ones still fighting somewhere underneath, it can be the thing that calls them back." I looked at this man's face. The monitor let out a long, warning tone. 72%. A nurse appeared at the door. Then another. Then a doctor I didn't recognize, already reaching for equipment, already moving with the organized urgency of someone who had run this particular race too many times. "We need the room. Give me 60 seconds. I said. "Sir, this patient is dead." 60 seconds. I don't know where the authority in my voice came from. Maybe from 4 years of learning when to fight for a patient. Maybe from the little girl gripping my hand who hadn't made a sound. The doctor stopped. I leaned forward. I placed one hand on the man's chest, over his heart, the way my grandmother had taught me, palm flat, feeling for any vibration of remaining will beneath the failing rhythm. There was something, faint, like an ember refusing to fully die. "I feel you," I thought. "You're still in there." I closed my eyes, and I pressed my lips to his. Not a kiss, not like that. Like a key in a lock. Like a hand extended to someone who had fallen. I breathed out slowly, deliberately, pushing warmth and intent through the contact the way my grandmother had shown me. The technique so old it had no medical name. The kind of thing that got you laughed out of conference rooms, but that she had made me practice on cold winter nights until it lived in my hands and my breath as instinct. Come back, I thought, with everything in me. There is a little girl here who needs her father. Come back. 3 seconds passed. Then 5. Then 8. The monitor screamed. Then it steadied. A beat. Then another. Then another. Slow and uncertain at first, like someone relearning how to walk, and then finding the rhythm, finding the ground beneath their feet, and the oxygen reading climbed 79, 83, 87, 91. The doctor behind me made a sound I had never heard from a doctor before. Mia made a sound I will never forget for the rest of my life. The man in the bed drew a long, deep breath. His fingers moved. I pulled back. My own hands were shaking. My vision went slightly white at the edges. The technique always cost something. My grandmother had warned me, you give a piece of your own warmth and your body notices, and I pressed my knuckles to my mouth and tried to steady myself. His vitals are stabilizing. The doctor was at the monitor now, voice stripped completely of its earlier authority, replaced with something approaching awe. What did you? I shook my head. I didn't have words. Mia threw her arms around my waist and buried her face in my side, and I held her and let her cry. Different tears now, loosened tears, the kind that come when the worst doesn't happen, and I watched the man in the bed breathe. Breathe, breathe, in and out, steady as the tide coming back. Good, I thought. Stay. The white at the edges of my vision spread. The last thing I registered before my knees gave out was one of the suited men catching me, and the monitor behind me beeping its calm, even rhythm. He was breathing. That was enough. I woke up in a hospital bed, which was strange because the last time I checked, I worked in one. I blinked at the ceiling, the familiar foam tiles, the familiar hum of the air conditioning, the familiar antiseptic smell that had long since stopped registering as a smell and become more of a default state of existence. Someone had put a blanket on me. There was an 4-line in my arm. You fainted, said a voice from the doorway. I turned my head. Jana, my charge nurse, my work wife, the woman who had pulled me out of more professional messes than either of us could count, was leaning against the doorframe with the expression she usually reserved for when I did something she found simultaneously impressive and deeply exasperating. The patient in ICU 7, I said immediately, is stable. She tilted her head. Remarkably, impossibly, inexplicably stable, according to every doctor who has looked at him in the last 3 hours. She paused. They're calling it spontaneous recovery. And the little girl? Mia. Jana's expression softened fractionally. She's with her nanny now. She asked about you 7 times before I stopped counting. She walked in and sat in the chair beside my bed. Eli, what did you do in that room? Something my grandmother taught me. Jana stared at me. Your grandmother. It works. Apparently. She rubbed her face. You should know that the patient regained partial consciousness about 40 minutes after they moved you out. Brief, he was only awake for maybe 2 minutes. She hesitated. But he was lucid enough to speak. I waited. He asked about you, she said. Specifically. He asked who had been at his bedside. Her eyes were careful now, watching mine. Then he said find him and passed out again. The room felt very still suddenly. Find him once he's awake. He probably just... I started. Eli. The men outside his room. Jana leaned forward. I recognized the insignia on their earpieces after I looked it up. Her voice dropped. That man in ICU 7. His name is Dante Caruso. The name landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. Even I, who paid almost zero attention to news outside of medical journals, knew that name. Dante Caruso. Mafia. Old blood. The kind of power that didn't advertise itself because it didn't need to. The kind of man who moved through the world like weather. You didn't see him coming, you just felt what he left behind. Oh, I said. Yes, said Jana. Oh. I looked back at the ceiling. Somewhere down the hall, that man was breathing. Steadily. Evenly. Because of something my grandmother had whispered to me over a kitchen table 15 years ago. Find him once he's awake. Don't read into it, I told myself. I was discharged from my own hospital bed, which was an experience in professional humiliation I would not be repeating, and sent home with instructions to sleep for at least 8 hours and eat something that wasn't from a vending machine. I did both. I slept deeply, dreamlessly, the sleep of a body that had genuinely given something of itself and needed to take it back. I ate leftover rice from my fridge standing over the kitchen sink because I was too tired to use a table like a functioning adult. Then I showered, changed, and went to bed properly. I did not think about the man in ICU 7. I did not think about the way the monitor had climbed back from the edge like something pulling itself up by sheer will. I did not think about his face. I was asleep by 9 p.m. I didn't hear the black SUVs pull up outside my apartment building. I didn't hear the elevator. I didn't hear anything at all until a large, warm hand pressed something soft over my nose and mouth, and the darkness behind my eyelids went from the natural dark of sleep to something heavier, chemical, complete. The last thing I registered, in the split second before it took me entirely, was the smell of expensive cologne and the murmur of a voice saying, "Careful. Don't hurt him." Then nothing. I woke up warm. That was the first thing that registered, and it was wrong enough to pull me toward consciousness before I was ready. I was always cold in my apartment. Old building, temperamental heating. I slept in 2 layers and still woke up most mornings reaching for an extra blanket. Whatever I was lying in now was warm. Deeply, expensively warm. The kind of warm that comes from mattresses that cost more than my monthly salary and thread counts I couldn't name because I'd never been in the same room as them. I opened my eyes. I was not in my apartment. The ceiling above me was high, the kind of architectural height that exists in buildings designed to make you feel small. Dark wood beams crossed it. Warm amber light came from fixtures along the walls, not overhead, giving the room a glow that felt almost deliberate. Almost like firelight without the fire. The bed I was in was enormous. For posts, dark wood again, carved, the kind of furniture that came with history and money and probably both. The sheets were white and heavy. There were floor-to-ceiling windows on one wall, curtains partially drawn, and beyond them I could see gardens, lit from below by soft landscape lighting. Trees I didn't recognize in the dark. I sat up slowly. My head ached faintly. My mouth tasted like whatever they'd used to put me under. I've been kidnapped, I thought, with a startling degree of calm. I have actually been kidnapped. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed. Scrubs. I was still in my scrubs, which meant they hadn't touched me beyond the transportation, which should have been a small comfort and instead just raised further questions. My shoes were on the floor beside the bed, neatly placed together. Careful. Don't hurt him. Someone had said that. I stood up and immediately grabbed the bedpost as the room tilted slightly. I gave myself 3 seconds to stabilize and then walked to the door. Unlocked. The hallway beyond was wide enough to be a room in most places I'd lived. Dark hardwood floors. Art on the walls, not decorative art, real art, the kind with weight behind it. More of those amber-lit fixtures. A staircase at the far end, sweeping down in a curve. I walked to the top of the stairs and looked down. A man stood at the bottom. One of the suited men from the hospital. He looked up at me without surprise, like he'd been waiting. "Where am I?" I asked. My voice came out steadier than I deserved credit for. "Mr. Caruso's residence." He paused. "You're not in danger. I was sedated and transported from my home without consent." I kept my voice level. "Define danger." Something that was almost respect moved across his face. "Mr. Caruso wants to see you." "Mr. Caruso," I said, "can make an appointment like a normal person." "Mr. Caruso," said another voice, quiet, careful, deeply familiar, "is aware that this was not the conventional approach." I looked past the suited man. Mia stood in the doorway of a room off the main hall, still in pajamas, dark hair loose around her face. She looked up at me with those old, enormous eyes. Then she ran to the bottom of the stairs and looked up at me with her hands clasped together. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, her voice small and earnest and absolutely devastating. "I told him what you looked like. I didn't know they were going to." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "He just really wanted to meet you. He always does things like this. He doesn't know how to ask." Another pause. "He's not good at asking." I looked at this 7-year-old girl who had somehow delivered the most thorough explanation of a billionaire mafia lord's emotional unavailability I had ever received. "Is he awake?" I asked. Her face lit up, brilliant, sunrise sudden, the same way it had collapsed in the hospital corridor, just completely inverted. "He woke up an hour ago." Her voice went higher with held-back feeling. "He asked for water and then he asked about you." She swallowed. "Will you come see him? He's not very good at being sick. He acts like he's fine and he's not fine yet and he won't let anyone sit with him, but I thought maybe." "Okay," I said. Her breath released. I came down the stairs. The room they took me to was at the far end of the ground floor, past a study lined with books that looked read rather than decorative, past a kitchen where someone was quietly making tea, past a set of double doors that the suited man opened without knocking. The room beyond was large and dim and smelled faintly of antiseptic. Someone had arranged private medical equipment along one wall, monitors, for stands, things that cost extraordinary amounts of money and still couldn't accomplish what my grandmother's technique had accomplished in 60 seconds. He was sitting up. He'd managed it himself by the look of things. Pillows arranged behind him with the slightly imprecise geometry of someone who'd refused help. He was still pale. The monitors beside him showed stable vitals that still had no business being stable given what they'd read 24 hours ago. His hands were folded in his lap and he was staring at the middle distance with the expression of a man who was fundamentally uninterested in being bedridden and was planning his escape from that condition as a matter of priority. Then he heard us enter and he turned his head. And I understood, suddenly and completely, why his eyes had felt significant even when they were closed. Dark, almost black, the kind that held things still. Not threateningly, not coldly, but with the absolute unhurried certainty of someone who had never in his life needed to chase anything because everything had always, eventually, come to him. They moved to my face and stayed there. I stood at the foot of his bed. Neither of us spoke. "You look younger than I expected," he said finally. His voice was rough from disuse, low and unhurried, with an accent I couldn't quite place. Like something European smoothed out by years of deliberate, careful English. "You look alive," I said, which was not guaranteed yesterday. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something that was deciding whether to be one. "Dante Caruso," he said. "Eli Park." I crossed my arms. "I know who you are. Most people do." He watched me. "Most people who know who I am do not speak to me like that." "Like what?" "Like they're not afraid of me. I spent the night being drugged and transported across the city in an SUV. I tilted my head. I'm still trying to work out how angry I am about that." He held my gaze without flinching. Without apology, but without aggression either, studying me the way the very powerful study things that don't behave the way they're supposed to. "I would have come to you," I said, "if you'd asked. If Mia had called." I glanced at the little girl hovering at the edge of the room. "She has my number. I gave it to her last night before they discharged me." Something changed in his expression. "She does?" she asked. I shrugged. "She's 7. She just watched her father come back from the edge of something. I wasn't going to say no to her." Very slowly, Dante Caruso turned his head to look at his daughter. Mia, to her immense credit, did not fidget under that look. She just lifted her chin very slightly in a way that was so perfectly reminiscent of the man in the bed that it almost made me laugh. He turned back to me. "Sit down," he said. "I wasn't asked here, Mr. Caruso." "Dante." Something in his tone when he corrected me. Not hard, not commanding. Something quieter than that. Something that sat closer to a request than anything else I suspected this man typically produced. He looked at me steadily. "And I'm asking now." I held his gaze for a long moment. Then I pulled a chair to his bedside and sat. He watched me settle. Then he looked down at his own hands. Those large, still hands. And something crossed his face that I didn't have a clinical name for. Something unguarded. Something I suspected very few people had ever been in the right place to see. "I was dreaming," he said quietly. "When I was under." He paused. "I don't remember most of it, but I remember warmth. Like something reached into wherever I was and..." He stopped. Looked up. The unguarded thing was still there. "Was that you?" The room was very quiet. "Yes," I said. He exhaled slowly through his nose. Something in his shoulders changed, dropped, fractionally, like a weight he'd been carrying had shifted. "Then I owe you my life," he said. Plainly, without theater. The way a man states a fact. "You don't owe me anything," I said. "Mia asked me for help. That's the only reason I walked into that room." He glanced at his daughter again. And the expression on his face when he looked at her. All the hardness gone, all the weight of everything, he was just completely absent. was something so private and enormous that I felt I'd accidentally seen something I wasn't meant to. Oh, I thought, he's not powerful in spite of loving her. He's powerful because of her. She is the whole thing. He reached his hand out. Mia crossed the room in 3 steps and put her small hand in his enormous one, and he closed his fingers around hers with a gentleness so careful it almost hurt to watch. She said you held her hand, he said, not looking at me yet. She was alone in the hallway. She's not supposed to be left alone. She was. I didn't say it unkindly. Your staff was focused on you. She was in the corridor for a long time. He looked at me then. And the thing in his eyes was not guilt exactly. I doubted this man sat easily in guilt, but something that served the same function. An acknowledgement. A reckoning. You're not what I expected, he said. What did you expect? His head tilted slightly. Mia had fallen asleep against his arm, between one breath and the next, the way small children can. Her body finally cashing in on the fear it had spent. He adjusted his arm slowly, carefully, to hold her weight, and kept his eyes on me. Someone who wanted something, he said. Everyone who gets close to me wants something. I looked at him steadily. I want to make sure your vitals hold through the night, I said. And then I want to go home. That's all I want. The almost smile came back. Settled this time. Actually became something. You can't go yet, he said. Mr. Dante. You can't keep kidnapping me every time you want something. No, he agreed. He said it so easily it surprised me. I can't. Pause. But I can ask. He held my gaze across the dim, warm room, his daughter sleeping against his arm, the monitors beside him charting the steady rhythm of a heart that had been called back from somewhere none of us had names for. Stay tonight, not as a captive, as a guest. I have 18 bedrooms and doctors who don't understand what you did. I would feel, he paused, and the pause was long enough that I understood it cost him something. Better, if you were here. I looked at Dante Caruso, at his face hard and soft at once, at his daughter asleep against his arm, at the monitors marking his pulse. Steady, steady, steady. I thought about my empty apartment and its temperamental heating and the fact that I had 3 days off before my next shift. One night, I said. Something moved through his eyes that I didn't let myself examine too closely. One night, he agreed. He was not in bed. Of course he wasn't. I found him standing at the window, dressed, upright, pale as paper and twice as immovable. He heard me enter and turned, and those dark eyes found me before I was ready. Your vitals are good, I said, moving straight to the monitor so I had somewhere to look that wasn't his face. Better than they should be. Because of you. Because your body cooperated. Because of you. He said it again slower, like the first time I hadn't actually taken it in. I heard him move 1 step, 2, and I kept my eyes on the screen. My men told me what you did, before you collapsed. It was a technique, old family thing, not worth. Show me. I turned. It doesn't work like that. Show me what you did. He said it simply, no edge to it, no command. Just a man who wanted to understand something and had decided he was going to. I was somewhere dark. I couldn't find the way back. His voice dropped slightly, and then something pulled me out. That was you. Show me how. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I crossed the room. I stopped in front of him. Close, the technique required close. I placed my palm flat against his chest and felt him go completely still. His heartbeat under my hand. Steady. Real. Alive in a way it hadn't been yesterday. You put your hand here first, I said, to find the heartbeat, to make sure there's still something to reach. He looked down at my hand, then back at my face. He hadn't moved back a single inch. And then, he said quietly, then you remind them. My voice came out quieter than I meant it to, that there's still warmth on this side, that it's worth coming back for. I swallowed, through breath, through contact. You. Show me. He said again. Dante, I started. Show me. He cut me off. I looked up at him. He was right there, close enough that I could see the exact moment his expression shifted. Not demanding now, not even asking. Just open. Completely, dangerously open. Like a man who had spent his whole life being closed had simply decided, in this room with me, to stop. I held his gaze. Then I rose on my toes. And I pressed my mouth to his. One breath. Warm and deliberate and careful the way my grandmother had taught me. Not a kiss, the beginning of one, the intention of one, warmth transferred from one body to another like passing a flame. He kissed me back. Not the technique. Not the transfer. Just him. His hand coming up slowly to my jaw, tilting my face, and kissing me back with the unhurried certainty of a man who had decided something and was done deliberating about it. I pulled back. We stood there, close, his hand still at my jaw, both of us breathing. That, I said, voice completely destroyed, is not exactly what the technique involves. I know, he said. He was almost smiling. The real version. The one I'd only seen directed at Mia until now. You need rest, I managed. I know that too. I stepped back, picked up his chart, put the clipboard between us like it was armor. I'll have the morning nurse. Eli. I stopped. Thank you, he said. For my life. 2 words. Everything behind them. I walked out before my face could do anything I'd have to explain. They drove me home. Black car, quiet driver, heated seats. I sat in the back and pressed my fingers to my mouth and told myself it was the technique. That it meant nothing. That I had a medical explanation for all of it. I almost believed myself. I was home for 3 days. On the 3rd morning my buzzer went. I answered it expecting my neighbor. It's Mia. Daddy's here too. I looked out my window and saw a black car at the curb. Dante leaning against it, hands in his pockets, looking up at my building. He saw me, didn't wave, just looked. That dark, total attention that didn't dress itself up as anything other than what it was. I buzzed them up. Mia arrived first, tulips in both arms, nearly taller than her. From the garden, she said. I picked them for you this morning. I took them before she crushed them completely. She walked past me into the apartment without waiting to be invited. Dante appeared in the doorway a second later and suddenly the hallway looked very small. She doesn't knock, he said. She gets it from someone, I said. He stepped inside. Mia had already found the bookshelf. She pulled out a title, examined it, put it back, pulled out another. Your apartment is small, she said, not unkindly. Just observing the way she observed everything, completely without apology. Mia, Dante said. It's nice though. She looked at me. Cozy. Ours is too big. Some rooms I forget exist. She replaced the book and turned to face us both. We should stay for lunch. We're not staying for lunch, Dante said. Why? Because we didn't ask. She looked at me. Can we stay for lunch? She asked. I looked at Dante. He looked back at me with the expression of a man who had lost this exact argument before and knew he was about to lose it again. I'll order something, I said. Mia turned back to the bookshelf, satisfied. We ate at my small table, the 3 of us barely fitting, Dante's presence filling the room in a way that had nothing to do with his size. Mia talked the whole meal. A boy in her class named Tomas who answered every question wrong with absolute unshakable confidence, and she couldn't decide if it was admirable or catastrophic. Dante laughed. Real, unguarded. The laugh he kept only for her. I sat with my food and watched them and felt something move in my chest that I had no interest in examining. You're quiet, Mia told me. You're not leaving space. She considered this seriously. Fair. She pointed at me. What are you thinking? Nothing. She looked at me for a long moment with those old, knowing eyes. You're a bad liar, she said pleasantly, and went back to her food. Dante looked at me over her head, said nothing, but the corner of his mouth moved. I looked out the window. They left at 2. Mia hugged me at the door, arms around my waist, face pressed into my side, and then let go and went to the elevator like it was nothing, like she'd been doing it for years. Dante stopped in my doorway. She's been asking about you every day, he said. Since the hospital. She's 9. She'll find a new obsession. She's particular. He held my gaze. She doesn't change her mind about people, and she hasn't been like this around anyone since her mother passed. He paused. Neither have I. I looked at him. Dante, I'm not asking for anything, he said. Not yet. He said it with such complete steadiness that I didn't know what to do with it. I just wanted you to know. He left. I stood in my doorway holding tulips and trying to remember how to breathe normally. 3 days later, my head nurse called me into her office. I knew from her face before she spoke. The hospital board met this morning, Jana said. She didn't look at me. Someone reported that you treated a patient outside your assignment. ICU 7. She set a folder on the desk. Dante Caruso, Eli. Do you understand what that name means to these people? The liability exposure alone. He was dying. That's not the point. His daughter was alone in the hallway. Eli. She finally looked at me. Her eyes were tired, scared. They're talking about your license. Someone on the board wants this referred to the medical council. She pushed the folder toward me. You need a lawyer. I walked out of her office and sat in the stairwell and stared at the wall. My phone rang. Dante. I almost didn't answer. I heard, he said before I spoke. How? I hear everything that concerns me. He paused. This concerns me. It's my problem. It became mine the second you walked into that room. His voice was low, certain. Don't move. I'm coming. Dante, you can't just. He'd already hung up. He was at the hospital in 20 minutes. I met him in the lobby before he could go further. The last thing I needed was Dante Caruso walking into a board meeting. You need to leave, I said. You need a lawyer. I have 4. That will make it worse. If they connect us. They already have. He looked at me steadily. Eli, let me fix this. You fix things with guns. Sometimes, he said without blinking. Not this time. He took out his phone, made a call, spoke for 45 seconds in a language I didn't catch and hung up. My legal team is on their way. This won't touch your license. You don't know that. I do. He put his phone away. I know how these boards work. I know what they're afraid of. None of them will move forward once they understand the full picture. I stared at him. What does that mean? It means I'm going to make sure everyone in that room knows that the nurse who saved my life is not someone they want to make an enemy of. He said it simply, like gravity. You saved me, Eli. The least I can do is make sure you still have a career. I didn't have words. Stop looking at me like that, he said. Like what? Like I'm doing something unexpected. Something crossed his face. I'm not a good man, but I pay my debts. Is that what this is? He looked at me for a long moment. No, he said quietly. It's not. His lawyers were extraordinary and ruthless, and the board meeting lasted 40 minutes. My license was never mentioned again. Jana found me at the nurse's station afterward. What just happened? She whispered. I have no idea, I said. That was mostly true. He called at 2 a.m. on a Thursday. I was asleep. I grabbed the phone already moving the way nurses do, body awake before the brain. His voice on the other end was completely different. All the composure gone. Mia has a fever, he said. It spiked fast. She's asking for you. Pause, barely a pause, more like a crack. I have doctors on call, but she keeps asking for you and I don't know what to. I'm coming, I said. I was already pulling on my shoes. You don't have to. Dante. I grabbed my keys. I'm coming. Mia was in bed, small and flushed. Her dark hair damp at her temples. She looked up when I came through the door and something in her expression just fell apart with relief. You came, she said. Of course I came. I sat on the edge of her bed and put my hand on her forehead. High but not dangerous. I looked at the doctor hovering in the corner. He'd already done everything right. This wasn't a medical emergency. This was a little girl who was scared and wanted someone specific. You're okay, I told her. Fever's doing its job. You're going to feel terrible for another day and then you'll be fine. Will you stay? She asked. For a while, I asked. For the whole night? I looked up. Dante was standing in the doorway. He'd been there the whole time, I realized. Watching his daughter, watching me, with an expression on his face so unguarded it almost hurt to see. All the armor completely gone. Just a father who had been terrified and was only now, with me in the room, letting himself breathe. The whole night, I said. Mia's hand found mine under the blanket and held on. She fell asleep around 3. I came downstairs and found Dante in the kitchen, standing at the counter with a glass of water he wasn't drinking, staring at nothing. He heard me and turned. "She's asleep," I said. "Fever broke a little. She'll be fine." He nodded, set the glass down, looked at me across the kitchen. "Thank you," he said, the same way he'd said it before, like the words cost something real. "She called for me," I said. "I wasn't going to not come." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "I almost didn't call you." "Why?" He looked at his hands. "Because I don't," he stopped, started again. "I'm scared of letting you into my world." Into... He stopped again. "If I call you at 2 a.m. and you come, that means something." I knew that before I dialed. The kitchen was very still. "So why did you call?" I asked. He looked up. "Because she wanted you," he said. "And because I did too." He held my gaze across the room. "And I'm done pretending I don't." I stood there in his kitchen at 3 a.m. in the clothes I'd thrown on half asleep and looked at this man, Mafia, billionaire, terrifying in every context except this one, standing in his own kitchen admitting something that clearly cost him everything, and felt the last wall I'd been maintaining just quietly come down. I crossed the kitchen. He met me halfway. He kissed me like he had, deliberate, certain, but different now. No performance behind it. No point being made. Just him and me and the quiet house around us. And upstairs a little girl sleeping off a fever who had pulled us both here by the sheer force of needing us in the same room. When we finally stopped, he pressed his forehead to mine. "She's going to be insufferable about this," he said. I laughed. Actually laughed. Against his mouth. "She already said she knew," I said. "Of course she did." He pulled back enough to look at my face. His hands were still at my jaw. "Stay," he said. Not a command. Not even a request. Just a word, offered with both hands open. "Yes," I said. Mia found us at breakfast. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in pajamas, hair everywhere, and stopped. Looked at her father. Looked at me. Looked at the distance between us, which was almost none. Slowly, a smile spread across her face. The enormous, whole-face kind. She turned around and walked back out. We heard her in the hallway. I knew it. I knew it. I knew it. Dante looked at me over his coffee. I put my hand over my mouth. He reached across and took my other hand and held it on the table in the morning light like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like it was already old. Already certain. Like it had always been going to be this. He proposed in the garden on a Sunday afternoon. No speech. No setup. Mia was on the grass pretending to read a book. Doing a terrible job of pretending. He reached into his pocket and put a ring in my palm and closed my fingers around it and looked at me. "Yes or no," he said. "Just tell me." From the grass Mia made a sound like a balloon releasing air very slowly and then went silent with the effort of containing herself. I looked at him, this man, who sent lawyers to protect my license without being asked, who called me at 2 a.m. and admitted it meant something, who learned to ask for things because his daughter told him he had to, who kissed me back and called it deliberate. "Yes," I said. He put the ring on my finger. Then he pulled me in and held on. Not carefully, not controlled, just completely. And over his shoulder I saw Mia abandon the book entirely and sit up with both fists pressed to her mouth, beaming so hard her whole face had become the smile. "I knew it," she mouthed. I laughed into his shoulder. He held on tighter. The wedding was small in his garden. Late afternoon light. Mia walked between us. She'd been immovable on the subject. I found him too. I was there first. I should walk between you. There was no arguing with that logic because it was completely correct. She held both our hands. Walked slowly. Seriously. The way she did everything that mattered. At the end of the aisle she looked up at me. All that love she'd been carrying. Since the hospital corridor. Since the tulips. Since 2 a.m. and a fever and a kitchen and a man who finally learned to ask. Settled in her eyes and went still. She squeezed my hand once. I squeezed back. Dante's fingers found mine over her head. And that was it. That was all of it. We were happy. The end.